Recreational diving ends at 40 meters or 130 feet, but the ocean doesn't. Most divers wonder what it takes to go deeper, 50 meters or 165 feet or beyond, and some may even feel pressured to go there. Don't let that be you. The truth is, deeper diving isn't about courage. It's about physics, training, and redundancy. At 50 meters or 165 feet, small mistakes don't feel small. They compound fast. And the scary part is you might not even realize you're making them. As a diver with years well into recreational diving and toe dipping into tech diving, I wanted to make this video to help clear up the misconceptions of diving deeper. If you've ever wondered whether you should go deeper, this video will help give you that clear framework to decide. I'm breaking down the real dangers, the certifications you need, and the gear standards that help keep technical divers alive. Let's start with why depth changes everything. Here's what depth changes first: your body, your thinking, your timeline. At the surface, you're at 1 atmosphere. At 10 meters or 33 feet, you're at 2. At 50 meters or 165 feet, you're at roughly 6 atmospheres total of pressure bearing down on your body and your equipment. That pressure doesn't just compress your wetsuit or buoyancy control device, the BCD. It compresses the gas you're breathing. And compressed gas behaves very differently than the air you breathe on land. First, there's gas narcosis, which is primarily caused by nitrogen being absorbed too quickly into your body. Nitrogen makes up about 79% of the air we breathe on land. It is largely inert in your body when at the surface, but under pressure it can act like a sedative. The deeper you go, the more pronounced the effect becomes. At 30 meters or 100 feet, you might feel a slight buzz, kind of like after one alcoholic drink. At 40 meters or 130 feet, it can feel more like 2 or 3. At 50 meters or 165 feet, your judgment is impaired. Your reaction time slows, and you might feel euphoric. That euphoria is dangerous because it makes you think everything is fine, when everything might not be fine. This is how you read a gauge and still miss what the actual number on that pressure is. You might miss the fact that you're breathing through your gas faster than you predicted. You might forget your diet plan. You might make a decision that doesn't end well for anyone involved. Narcosis isn't just something you can train away. You can get better at recognizing it, managing task loading, and choosing to ascend early, but you can't remove the physics. Some divers report feeling a bit clearer on nitrox because there's less nitrogen in the mix, but it's not a reliable narcosis fix, and you should never count on it to prevent narcosis. Nitrox can help mitigate some of the dangers of gas narcosis, but due to its own limitations of oxygen toxicity, you can't go that much deeper with even nitrox. When you truly need narcosis control at depth, helium is the standard tool, as the gas particles are very small and light. Unfortunately, helium can be very expensive to add to your gas mixture. The second thing we gotta talk about is that there's a shrinking no decompression limit. At around 18 meters or 60 feet, you can often stay down for roughly 50 to 60 minutes without mandatory decompression stops, depending on your table and how conservative the computer you're using is. At 30 meters or 100 feet, you're typically down to 20 to 25 minute range. At 40 meters or 130 feet, you're just down to 9 to 10 minutes. And by 50 meters or 165 feet on air, you're basically out under 4 minutes or less before decompression becomes part of the plan. Here's the plain version. No decompression, or NDL, means you can go straight to the surface if you have to. Under an emergency, you can go to the surface. But once you owe decompression, the surface stops being an option. You have what they call a virtual ceiling. Miss that window, and you're now obligated to make a decompression stop on the way up. Skip those stops and you risk decompression sickness, or DCS. Inert gas coming out of a solution and forming bubbles in your blood and tissues, which can cause significant internal damage. That's not a minor inconvenience. That's a trip to a recompression chamber if you're lucky. Permanent damage, permanent injury, or death if you're not. Notice the pattern. Depth doesn't add one problem, it multiplies them. The third thing we got to discuss here is your gas consumption accelerates. At the surface, one breath uses 1 unit of gas. At 10 meters or 33 feet, that same breath uses 2 units. And 50 meters or 165 feet, it uses 6 units. Because that compressed gas in your tank is pressurizing to ambient pressure before you breathe it. Your cylinder empties about 6 times faster at 50 meters or 165 feet than it does at the surface. And compared to 10 meters or 33 feet, your gas disappears about 3 times faster at 50 meters or 165 feet. So a cylinder that might last you an hour at 10 meters or 33 feet can look more like 20 minutes at 50 meters or 165 feet before you account for reserve gas and decompression planning. That's a very rough example, but it shows you the multiplier. Depth turns your tank into a countdown clock. Run out of gas at depth and you're in a life-threatening emergency with no margin for error, especially considering you may have a mandatory decompression due to the depth that we already talked to. The fourth thing is gas density becomes a physiological problem. Dense gas is harder to move in and out of your lungs. Your respiratory muscles have to work harder. And under exertion, that higher work of breathing, or WOB, can contribute to CO2, carbon dioxide retention. And CO2 can drive air hunger and amplify that gas narcosis we talked about earlier, which is a common panic pathway. And here's what that feels like. You're breathing, but it doesn't feel like you can get a full satisfying breath. At 50 meters or 165 feet, panic can escalate into a fatal chain of mistakes very, very fast. And finally, there's the cold. Water conducts heat about 25 times faster than air. And in many places, you hit a thermocline and it gets colder fast. Cold water saps your energy, reduces dexterity, and clouds your thinking. And the hypothermia amplifies every risk that we've just covered. And so the reality of it is when you dive deeper, you're likely going to go into decompression and you need a longer decompression stop. And so that means if you're cold, it's going to slow down your decompression time. And because that virtual ceiling, you can't just go to the surface. So you have to stay down and you must stay warm. And so that becomes a problem to solve. So why does recreational diving stop at 40 meters or 130 feet? Because that's where the physics, the physiology, and the risk converge for standard training and equipment. Beyond 40 meters or 130 feet, you're not just diving deeper, you're entering a different domain entirely. One that requires different certifications, different gas mixes, and different gear. More redundancy. These dangers aren't theoretical. They're the reason deep diving certifications exist. They're the reason why tech divers have a high pedigree to be able to go down at that depth. Let's talk about what those certifications actually teach you. And if you're enjoying this video, now's a great time to like and subscribe. If you find this information valuable, share it with other divers. I post weekly content, help divers grow their skills, build confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And by the way, I have a monthly free newsletter to keep you updated with the latest and greatest of the scuba diving industry. Check it out in the description below and I'll see you there. Here's the key idea. Depth is earned through capability, not confidence. Deep diving certifications aren't just nice to have. If you want to do deeper dives responsibly, they're the only pathway that makes the risks manageable. For you to learn the skills to mitigate the dangers involved. But not all pathways are equal in opinions, but they all generally arrive at a safe baseline. From here is the general guidance on paths, but it may vary based on your diving industry. Let's start with advanced open water. This is your first step beyond basic open water certification. And in my mind, it's kind of more like open water level 2. Advanced open water typically introduce deeper profiles up to 30 meters or 100 feet with controlled exposure under instructor supervision. The real takeaway is discipline at depth without chaos. You will start building better habits around gas awareness, dive planning, discipline, and navigation, using your computer or tables to stay inside your limits. Next is the deep diver specialty. This certification takes you to the recreational limit, 40 meters or 130 feet. The real takeaway is planning and ascent control under stress. Here you're building the skills that separate casual divers from competent deep divers. You'll learn deeper dive planning, more deliberate gas management, and ascent discipline with safety stops. You'll start also building awareness of the gas narcosis. Your instructor may give you tasks at depth, writing on a slate, solving simple problems, checking your gauges, to kind of get to see how that gas narcosis might start affecting your ability to think, especially while being task loaded. The goal isn't to prove you can handle the gas narcosis. The goal is to recognize when it's affecting you so you can make the decisions to ascend before it becomes dangerous. You'll also often practice emergency protocols in a way that requires higher attention to detail that deeper diving needs. Things like controlled sharing ascents, managing task loading, and deploying a surface marker buoy from depth. You'll also learn how to plan dives with tighter, no decompression limits, and how to use dive computers to track multi-level dive profiles. Deep Diver teaches you that every dive starts with a plan, and every plan has contingencies. It's not about pushing limits, it's about understanding your margins and staying within them. And Deep Diver might be spread across multiple courses depending on your agency. But if you want to go beyond the recreational limit of 40 meters or 130 feet, you're now talking about technical diving territory. Technical diving can be described as any dive that goes past your NDO, or rather, we'll have decompression on the dive. This is where recreational diving ends and technical diving begins. The real takeaway is learning to handle failure while you're obligated to stay underwater because you have that virtual ceiling. These courses teach decompression theory, advanced gas planning, and failure management more in depth than you needed to know recreationally, because recreationally you don't have that virtual ceiling. You'll learn how to plan stage decompression stops, how to manage multiple gas mixtures, and how to handle equipment failures at depth. You'll also learn a lot more about oxygen toxicity more in depth, because at technical depths, the partial pressure of oxygen becomes a hard limit, as I mentioned earlier. You may need different mixes at different phases of the dive to manage narcosis, gas density, and oxygen exposure. Technical diving isn't just advanced open water with a bigger cylinder. It's a completely different discipline with completely different standards. Each certification builds on the last, and technical diving is often spread across many courses with progressively deeper ratings. Advanced open water expands your depth, exposure, and core habits. I feel most divers should definitely do the advanced open water, as I like to personally call it open water part 2. Deeper diver builds structured deep dive planning and deeper emergency skills. It really builds on top of advanced diver and makes you a more proficient diver while still staying within recreational limits. And it's worth noting that you might be a recreational diver, but down to recreational limits of 40 meters or 133 feet, you might think that you can dive down there because you are a recreational diver, but it's worth noting that your insurance might not cover you because you're not certified to go past 30 meters or 100 feet unless you have the deep diver. So I just want to mention that you may not actually be certified. So I've met a lot of individuals who regularly dive down that deep, but haven't had the proper training. So I just want to put the asterisk there for your knowledge. And then the technical certifications add decompression management, gas switching, and redundancy protocols. You can't skip steps here. Your life depends on it. The deeper you go, the more proficiency you need. And I really strongly believe all that proficiency is needed. You can't skip the steps. The skills pyramid exists because each level depends on mastering the level before it. And if you want to go deeper, beyond 50 meters or 165 feet down to 65 meters or 215 feet, you're looking at extended deep range technical certifications. And at that depth, you're often using helium-based mixes like Trimix. You're managing multiple decompression stops that can rival or exceed your bottom time, and you're carrying redundancy for critical life support systems. At these depths is where you also have to start learning about hypoxic gas that is going to be less than 21%, and basically you start breathing only at depth. Ultimately, training gives you knowledge, skill, and wisdom, but the gear gives you the margin for survival, and knowing how to use it is everything. So here's what changes when divers go deep safely. They don't rely on luck, and they start building systems. Redundancy is non-negotiable. You'll have pretty much 2 of everything. At 50 meters or 165 feet, a single equipment failure can become fatal before you even reach the surface. And that's why technical divers use twin set cylinders. 2 cylinders manifolded together with independent regulators as back-mounted doubles, or separated cylinders, 2 entirely separated on the sides as a side mount. Both are twin sets. If one regulator fails on either, you can shut it down and breathe from the other. You'll always have a backup. And gas mixes change with depth. At recreational depths, nitrox can reduce nitrogen loading by lowering the percentage of nitrogen in the gas that you breathe, which can extend no decompression limits on many dives. But nitrox has its limits, as mentioned earlier. The deeper you go, the higher the partial pressure of oxygen becomes. Too much oxygen under pressure raises the risk of oxygen toxicity, and that includes the risk of having a seizure underwater. And you can imagine how bad that would be. So that's where Trimix comes in. Trimix is a blend of helium, oxygen, and nitrogen. Helium is far less narcotic than nitrogen and can dramatically reduce narcosis at depth, keeping you clear-headed at 50 meters or 165 feet or deeper. But Trimix requires precise mixing and decompression planning before the dive. It also requires a pretty hefty wallet. So you're likely not to just fill the cylinder and go. You're likely not just gonna always have helium in your cylinder and probably just do every dive with helium. Not when one breath is probably several dollars. But ultimately, what you'll end up doing is needing to calculate the percentage for your planned depth. And you may need to switch gases as you ascend to keep oxygen exposure and decompression under control by switching gases at appropriate depths. And then there's closed circuit rebreathers, or CCR units. A rebreather maintains a target oxygen partial pressure in your breathing loop as you change depth, and that's pretty cool. It scrubs out the CO2 you exhale and adds oxygen to maintain that set point. The result is extremely high gas efficiency, potentially longer bottom time, and sometimes more efficient decompression for the given bottom time, depending on how the dive is planned. This is how divers do long, deep dives without hauling a mountain of cylinders. A dive that planned to consume 200 bars or 300,000 psi on an open circuit might only need a fraction of that on a rebreather, but that exact number depends heavily on depth, workload, and the unit. You can even add helium into the mix, and the CCR unit will always use the exact amount needed for the depth, saving costs on helium. That's really cool. But rebreathers are quite complex. The trade is complexity and some upfront cost. It has more capability, but more ways to fail. They require meticulous pre-dive checks, constant monitoring during the dive, failure drills, and gear redundancy that become like second nature. A rebreather failure at depth is a life-threatening emergency. Every piece of gear serves a purpose. Redundant regulators give you a backup gas source. Redundant dive computers with multi-gas tracking help manage decompression obligations in real time, but require you to tell it the current situation. The skill pyramid applies here too. Technical divers master buoyancy, trim, propulsion, and gas planning before they add the complexity. A good standard is not adding a rebreather until you can hold stable buoyancy and trim while doing real work calmly and consistently. Deep diving isn't about going deeper for the sake of it. It's about understanding what it takes and building the skills and systems to handle what depth throws at you. Ultimately, deep diving is a privilege, earned through training, not a limit to push recklessly. If you want to explore deeper, commit to the process. Each certification builds the foundation for the next one. The ocean rewards preparation. So if you're looking to build those skills that you might need, check out my intermediate skills playlist over here, and YouTube thinks you would like this video over here. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.